Well, welcome to the Daily Brief on Metro Milwaukee's health and the economy, brought to you by the Medical College of Wisconsin and the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. I'm Tim Sheehy, president of the MMAC, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. John Raymond. We provide you a 19-minute fact-filled update on COVID's impact on the health and the economy. This webcast is powered by Aurora WDC, and our special guest today is Department of Administration Secretary Joel Brennan. But let's start Monday out with a recap and an update on where we stand. Dr. Raymond?
Thanks, Tim. I'll quickly run through the indicators. The doubling times in Wisconsin were 17.1 days, in Milwaukee 20.46 days, slightly extended out from previous days. The daily growth rate over the last 7 days was 2.9% in Wisconsin and 3.2% in Milwaukee. Positive tests out of 4,828 administered were 144 in Wisconsin and 60 in Milwaukee, with a percentage rate of 6.1 in Wisconsin. Milwaukee percentage is pending. Testing capacity was stable at 13,392 in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin hospitalizations rose slightly to 379 inpatients with 127 in intensive care. Now, there are 444 immediately available ICU beds as of today. Our ICU and ventilator capacity are stable and adequate. PPE trends also are stable in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, with continuing critical shortages of N95 masks and gowns. And the reproductive number over the last 7 days rose somewhat to 1.1 in Wisconsin and 1.3 in Milwaukee. Remember that the R number is a metric that we'll follow closely because it gives us a snapshot of how contagious the COVID-19 virus is at any given time. And recall that any value over 1 implies that the pandemic is growing. These R values were most likely influenced by the high number of positive tests over the last 5 days, over which time we've had 4 of our 5 highest days of positive tests since the pandemic began. And as with many of our metrics, we'll follow the trend over time rather than focusing on the value for a single day. Next slide, please. In the next few slides, I'd like to discuss vaccines. And I'll start with the big news from last week that President Trump has approved Operation Warp Speed, the purpose of which is to accelerate the quest for a COVID-19 vaccine. And he likened this effort to the Manhattan Project. The goal is to produce 300 million vaccine doses in the US by the end of 2020. And there are 14 vaccine candidates that are being tracked that could be eligible for funding from an $800 million pool that will expedite the manufacture. This is going to be headed by the former head of GSK PLC's vaccine division and General Gustave Perna-Gustave, commander of the US Army Materiel Command. So he is a supply chain expert. Next slide, please. This slide tells the story of vaccine development in pictorial form. There are 3 types of vaccines under development right now, as shown by the colored arrows on the left. One new and relatively unproven technique uses nucleic acids like RNA or DNA, as shown in the top flow diagram. Another tried and true method uses killed or attenuated COVID-19 virus, such as the technique used to develop the polio vaccine. And the third uses a synthetic protein from the virus to generate an immune response. Now, those older methods are shown in the bottom flow diagram. What's different and perhaps radical about the RNA or DNA approach is that the method uses a person's own body to produce the virus protein. That means that the vaccine only needs to be produced in relatively small scale because the person's body is the manufacturing plant, so to speak. Next slide, please. This next slide shows examples of the 3 types of approaches. Pfizer is using a modified RNA approach. Oxford University is using the synthetic protein antigen approach. And Sinovac, a large Chinese pharmaceutical company, is using a chemically inactivated COVID-19 virus. All of the efforts are aimed at developing a rapid new COVID-19 vaccine. And all of them are in early phase human trials. And if you want to track COVID-19 vaccine development more closely, please refer to the excellent website shown in this slide, of the Milken Institute or Bill Gates' blog at gatesnotes.com. Next slide, please. Now, this next slide shows this week's big news. Moderna has used a modified RNA approach to try to develop a rapid COVID-19 vaccine. And this effort was funded by a $483 million investment from BARDA. This is a very small trial that used 45 people simply to assess the safety of this modified RNA virus. And this kicked off in early March. And what I want to focus on today, and which caused a rally from the stock market today, was an 8-person sub-study. Those 8 people received 3 different doses of the RNA vaccine administered twice. And these were 25, 100, and 250 microgram doses. What they found was that the volunteers who received the 25 microgram dose developed antibodies in the same range as people who have recuperated from an active COVID-19 infection. More excitingly, the volunteers who received the 100 microgram dose developed an even higher level of antibodies than we typically see in recuperated patients. So this is very promising early development in the RNA vaccine quest for COVID-19. Next slide, please. This slide shows the complexity of the usual vaccine development pathway, which averages at about 12 years in the US. And it has preclinical, clinical, manufacturing, quality control, and regulatory steps. And each of these steps typically takes years. And once a vaccine has been tested and is under production, up to 70% of the production time is devoted to quality control. So as you can see, if we attempt to compress these processes, it will involve cutting many corners. Next slide, please. This slide lists just some of the steps that will need to be expedited or corners that will need to be cut to have a vaccine for COVID-19 soon. Now, the specifics don't matter for the purpose of this presentation, but I list them here simply to demonstrate the many moving parts of the vaccine development process that need to move at warp speed for us to have a vaccine that's distributed by the end of this year. Next slide, please. And this final slide is provided to you for future reference, and this presentation can be downloaded from the handout panel in the webinar. So I want to thank you for your attention and turn it back over to Tim.
Thanks, Dr. Raymond. I've asked you this question in baseball terms before about what inning we're in with COVID-19. So let me ask you this question, and maybe a difficult one for you to answer. What inning are we in the development of a vaccine?
It's a great question. We're probably still in the 2nd or 3rd inning, but we've got the bases loaded with nobody out.
So in other words, a swing like this could really jumpstart the introduction of a vaccine, or we, in a sense, we could strike out.
Yeah, I think all those are true, but this is really exciting. And what's most exciting about it is they really have been talking about these RNA vaccine methods for years, and this is the first really good proof in human beings that this concept could work.
Wow, great. So I know you'll stick around with questions. And let me bring Joel Brennan back online here, the Secretary of the Department of Administration. And Joel, a number of questions for you, but let me start with one that kind of presages the discussion we're having in the private sector, and that is, as we kind of move through the crisis here, it now becomes a crisis of economic recovery. And as you're starting to put together the state's fiscal picture, what kind of challenges does that present?
Well, really, Tim, I mean, this is something, the COVID-19 pandemic is something that has had impact on every business. As you point out, the state is a big employer. We have 35,000 employees at the state level. We have 35,000 at the UW. And so we're doing everything we can, much like the employers are in Milwaukee, of putting our employees at the center of what that return looks like. But more broadly, we're looking at how can we make this recovery be about the consumer as well. You have pointed out that, GDP in Wisconsin has gone down. I think you noted like 30%, a very small percentage of that, 5% or so was due to the governor's safer at home and all of those things, much more driven by consumer demand. So we have to do, regardless of the timing of this, as things roll out, as the economy comes back, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that people feel confident and comfortable going back and doing some of those retail things and that's why we're doing things like what the governor announced today. And I hope maybe we'll chat a little bit about that too.
Yeah, and one of the announcements today that I want you to talk about is putting $75 million towards helping small businesses recover in Wisconsin. How will that work?
Well, so there are about 140,000 businesses in Wisconsin that have less than 20 employees. So this program, $75 million that will be focused out of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, that will provide immediate funding in $2,500 grants to up to about 30,000 of these companies. These are Main Street companies all around the state. They're small companies. Before we went on today, you were talking about hairstylists and barbershops. It's really some of the core businesses, restaurants and small retailers, and they need some cash to kind of restart, whether it's putting things up regarding health safety in their places, whether it's wages that they have to do, whether it's inventory. There are things they have to do to kind of keep things or get things back going and make sure that they can provide as safe and responsible a way as they can to reopen. So this will be really the start of that. And this is, as you know, this is some of the about $2 billion that we've gotten in coronavirus relief funding that the governor and the state have some great flexibility on being able to do. So the state got about $2 billion in that fund. The city of Milwaukee got some money, about $100 million. Dane County, Milwaukee County also have some of those funds. But we need to make sure we're getting those on the street as soon as possible. So what we talked about today, the applications will start next week. These funds will start to roll out in the next couple of weeks. So it's really about, as much as we can, maximizing the federal resources we can, but getting it out on the street as quickly as we possibly can too.
Yeah, can you also talk about the other decision that the governor made today following the Supreme Court ruling? Of course, Safer at Home, as it was currently implemented, was put on hold by that ruling. But the governor announced today what, Joel?
He announced that, so on Friday, we had taken the formal step of submitting a scope statement to the legislature about what these emergency rules would look like. Those were, it may have been predictable, but people have seen those were not well received by people in the legislature, by the legislative committee that would have oversight on this. And so we have pulled those back. There have been a number of people in the legislative leadership who have said now that there is no need for additional formal guidelines. There can be some quarrel about that, but at this point, there's really not a productive way for us to move forward on that. So we pulled those back. There are still going to be conversations with the legislative leadership about how we can move forward together. In what actually I think was a good sign over the weekend, the Department of Children and Families also announced today that they're going to be putting about another $50 million on the street for child care providers. Those will go directly to child care providers. They'll provide grants to those and grants to people who are in really important roles in the recovery and what's going on right now for first responders. So that's $50 million also from the CARES Act that's going to be going right on the street. The legislature and the Joint Finance Committee could have slowed that process down. They could have objected to it because this is like their passive review. They, with a little modification, allowed that to move forward. So, in some ways, that's one way that the legislature and the administration are trying to work together, and we're trying to work together to get this support from the federal government on the streets as quickly as we possibly can, so we can do what everybody wants: have a safe, hopefully a methodical, thoughtful return to Wisconsin, getting to where we want it to be economically.
Another question: there was some dispute over about $25 million in federal funding for unemployment comp. Is there any chance Wisconsin's going to be able to recover that?
I think those are, the conversations are still underway with regard to that. But unfortunately, you know, everybody wants, and we all should be about how do we get how do we get that federal, as many of those federal resources, how do we get them out as quickly as possible? And in that case, it was, you know, unfortunately, the way that the legislature acted, it cost us the ability to get that right away. Now, those conversations will continue. There's also discussions, as you know, about a fourth round of support from the federal government that would provide direct support to states, local governments, tribes to replace lost revenue. All of the support so far has just been for COVID-19 response. Now they're looking at some stuff that could be for the lost revenue that's been associated with it. That's really important to the state. And I think that those are the kind of things that hopefully in a bipartisan way, in a unified fashion, we're going to be pushing forward on in the days to come.
And then last question, we'll bring Dr. Raymond in. Now that we are where we are in a sense, and 72 counties have kind of control over what happens under COVID-19, any thoughts from the administration if there's a resurgence or what would trigger any kind of state response in the future?
Well, all of that, as you know, there's a dashboard that you maintain. There's a dashboard that we maintain at the state. There are people who are working on this day and night. And I think one of the things, and Dr. Raymond frankly deserves credit for this, you and the business community, the responsible people who have thoughtfully looked at this over the last 8 weeks. Wisconsin is in a good place. We are, you know, on a per capita basis, we're in the top 5, or at least we were last week, in terms of the amount of testing, the capacity for testing that we have. We've done well. We're on the lower rung of our Midwestern neighbors in terms of the per capita numbers of cases, the per capita deaths. So all that's to be celebrated. And all that is also a partnership at the state level, at the local health providers, the local public health employers, responsible employers, and people in their individual households. So all those are good things to build on, but we absolutely have to keep our eye on that. We know, I think everybody understands, we're operating on the razor's edge, and we have to keep a very keen eye on those things. And, you know, we shut down very quickly when this first came up in March. I think everybody wants to make sure that we're doing the right methodical steps, the thoughtful steps moving forward, so we don't have to go back at all.
Thank you. Dr. Raymond, if you join us back, we'll go to our audience for questions.
Yeah, we had a question for Dr. Raymond, but Secretary Brennan, if there's a government perspective on this, we'd love to hear it too. Dr. Raymond, the safety of in-person summer camps for children, what's your thought on that right now, even whether it's day camp or overnight?
It's still too early to really know. We know that children tend to be less symptomatic than adults, but they can have devastating illness, especially the Kawasaki-like disease. And they can spread the disease to their parents or grandparents. So, you know, I would say it's at best a coin toss that's safe, but we'll see.
Secretary Brennan, you mentioned support for child care providers. Is there a summer camp provision for that, or is that separate?
Well, some of those places, like the YMCA and others who are child care providers, also do some of that summer camp work as well. So there certainly will be an intertwining of those things. But as Dr. Raymond says, on the broader summer camps and those for whom that's really important, both on the enrichment side, but also on the daycare aspect of that, or what that provides for families, I think there still is lots of miles to go before we can determine, before the healthcare system can tell us exactly how safe that's going to be and how much we can move forward on it.
Thank you. Tim, we had a question for you about whether, as businesses kind of spool up and look to rehire employees, hopefully, will they face a challenge in employees that either may have concerns about coming back because of their safety or because of the unemployment benefits that are out there?
Well, I think certainly on both accounts. And as we've talked a number of times on this program, consumer confidence and employee confidence are going to drive the recovery. And so as we look to put together with the medical college a toolkit for employers that they can use to make sure that their employees are safe, their workplaces are safe, and they're dealing with their customers in a safe fashion, that'll certainly help. And unless something changes, the federally enhanced unemployment benefits run out at the end of July. That's certainly going to keep some folks sidelined. And then I think we're all going to prepare for the challenges of the economic recovery as those folks come back into the workforce, hopefully to find jobs that are still there for the vast majority of them.
Dr. Raymond, we had a question about how the R number is calculated, and I wanted you to maybe revisit something I've heard you say before, is that a small change in the R number can actually be a big difference.
Yeah, so this is the second time someone asked about the calculation. So I will bring it in as a handout on Wednesday so that people, it's a very complicated calculation. But basically, let's say that your R number is 1.25 and that the average time to spread an infection is a week. What that means is a person will, on average, cause 1.25 infections. And if you think about compounding interest over we'll say 4 periods of compounding interest would be at 4 in a month, then that 1.25 number amplifies pretty quickly. So you really need it to be at or slightly below 1 if you want to keep the pandemic from growing.
And finally, we did have a question about the MMAC toolkit for businesses, when that might be rolling out.
Well, hopefully it's going to roll out tomorrow, and we'll join a number of other options out there, and included in that toolkit are going to be line of sight to WEDC's good set of good toolkit along with others. So thanks for the question, and stay tuned tomorrow where we'll talk about the toolkit and what it means for employers and creating safe and healthy workplaces. So with that, Dr. Raymond, again, thank you for joining us in the update. And Joel, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, and hope to have you back in the future.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Joel.
Have a safe and healthy rest of your day.
Thanks.